Um, Welcome back to our ongoing series on Trigger Warning by Neil Gaiman. If you are just now joining us, I should let you know that we are on Facebook at facebook.com/JSBookTalk. That's J as in Jordan, S as in Stefan, BookTalk. And we want to hear from all of you, hear suggestions that you might have for upcoming episodes, get your feedback on the different books that we're talking about and everything. And also, hear your ideas for the expansion of Book Talk if we want to start doing author interviews and conversations about the craft of writing and that kind of thing as well. So in any event, we are back with Trigger Warning. The first story that we'll be looking at today in part 2 of our 3-part series is going to be called The Case of Death and Honey. And this was a Sherlock Holmes story set up to be sort of the last Sherlock Holmes story if it was canon. This one really fascinated me. I thought this was just such a brilliant idea because it's one of those things where you kind of take an old concept, which is a Sherlock Holmes mystery, and you turn it on its head. You make it the mystery becomes about something other than just a whodunit, and it becomes a scientific mystery. In this case, the pursuit of immortality.
Oh, this is a fantastic little piece of fiction. It's probably my favorite out of the whole series. There have been numerous kinds of short stories and novellas by authors over the years. It's been kind of strange. I mean, the license is still, it's still licensed under the Doyle estate. So you have to ask them until 2023 until you're allowed to do whatever you want with Sherlock. But everyone from Ellison to the infamous Mary Russell character by Laurie R. King in The Beekeeper's Apprentice, they all have a really good, cool take on either Sherlock as in a contemporary setting, in a futuristic setting, in a supernatural setting. So this one takes an established piece of lore that in his later years Sherlock got into beekeeping. So it just sort of naturally flowed into that. And the great thing about this story, aside from it being very tight and very well written, is that it has these two forms of narration, and one of them is Sherlock talking to the audience, and then there's this sort of letter version and these two intersecting stories finally come to pass, and then you see what's going on. And I thought that by itself, it didn't have to be a Sherlock story, but because it was, and because it had the beekeeping element and it had the lore, it just beautifully connected. And I thought this was so clever to do it that way, and to have that little challenge by Mycroft, I thought was even it was just right on the money for this kind of story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's one of those stories where there's always, with certain ongoing and beloved franchises like this, or I should say characters, franchises like this, there's always this desire to see the characters in the story from a certain angle that is not really given to us in the actual story. I think that's actually kind of a bizarre derivation here, but I think that's actually the part of the appeal of we see like erotic fan fiction where we get people write fiction where their favorite characters get together and are finally amorously involved and that kind of thing. And I think it's the same thing. It's like wanting to see that dimension of the characters that is implied to be there, but that we never, for whatever reason, never see fully explored. And that's what this was like to me. This was like a perspective on the Holmes character that was just so incredibly satisfying, because it's the sort of thing, especially deals with his relationship with Watson, and it's the sort of thing where you always know that this kind of relationship and this kind of dynamic is there, and to see it finally fully explored is just so satisfying.
Oh,
so
of course.
That was,
of course,
that was my take on it.
It's always a form of fan fiction whenever you talk about Sherlock Holmes, and I know when you talk about the romantic side, the hardcore people of the Holmesian traditions are like, this is ridiculous, this would never happen. But then you have a writer like Laurie R. King who writes about Mary Russell, who ends up becoming Sherlock's wife. So that sort of stuff, it sort of makes you rethink what's going on. Is this really a detective fiction story? Is it a retelling? But it's a character, and it's a genre, and a franchise that everyone loves. So there's always something to appreciate, like when the 2015 Mr. Holmes, which was based off A Slight Trick of the Mind book by, I can't remember the guy's name, but...
Oh, and I know what you mean, and I'm blanking on it too, damn.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, great, wow, a Sherlock story about something else in Sherlock's world that you're not really used to. That's always a nice look at things that you don't usually get when you read the original novels or novellas and short stories. So yeah, props to Gaiman for doing this. This is my favorite story in the whole book. I think this is worth the price of admission. It is that good for me. Even if you're not a fan of Holmes, this is a very quaint, little concise story written in a style that's very astute. So yeah, it's just very well done.
Great. I agree. And reading it, initially, the two narratives, until they came together, it was actually very irritating and frustrating for me, trying to figure out what was going on. And then when they came together, I was just like, Santa Maria, this is amazing. So the next story is The Man Who Forgot Ray Bradbury. This was interesting to me because I don't know that there was anything necessarily fantastical or science fiction-y about it. It's just about a man who is obviously an elderly man suffering some form of dementia, perhaps Alzheimer's or something like that, and his memory is going, and he's trying desperately to hold on to the things that are important to him, and one of those things is the stories of Ray Bradbury. And haunting, heartbreaking, just a very good emotional piece, I thought.
Yeah, parts of these stories that Gaiman is writing, there's always this two-sided way of taking it. Is this a person who's remembering Ray Bradbury, or is this actually Ray Bradbury who's remembering the stuff he's done, or his bookshelf in his mind? So there's always these two ways of looking at it, and they're both fleshed out in the sense that yes, this is a person, and they're doing these things, and they're remembering these things, but there's also this intimate knowledge of the stories that if you actually understood the books behind, like the information behind the books or how they were made, like, yeah, this could be a mild case of dementia for Ray Bradbury in his later years. Yeah. So there's that element, but that's all the story is. It's nothing big, but it is that concise little sort of, oh, wow, this is kind of sad.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, I was just kind of, it's just something that gives you pause. I mean, it's just a kind of haunting feeling. And, it's Alzheimer's runs in my family, so that's something that I, have thought about myself having to confront later in life. And it is it is that kind of just makes you stop and think for a minute. Speaking of things that make you stop and think for a minute, this next piece, Jerusalem. Okay, this is one of those ones where I'm just like, what in the hell is going on? I think correct me if I'm wrong, Stefan, but it begins by referencing Jerusalem, the hymn by the hymn that's based on the poem by William Blake, which is talking about Jerusalem existing in England, and that seems to be what's happening. Am I on the right track? Am I veering dangerously close to accuracy?
Yeah, it starts off, we're in that setting, and then all of a sudden we're in Jerusalem, and then we're suddenly back. Yeah.
Yeah. This one kind of went over my head. I didn't really resonate with me that much. What about you?
I got what he was trying to do with it. I understood that it's a man and his middle-aged man with his wife, and they went to Jerusalem, and she was having this epiphany, as apparently it's a syndrome in Jerusalem that people do that whenever they go to the Holy Land. And it does come off after the end as like, okay, I'm going to start listening to my wife now, or maybe I'm going to just take off to a bar and start listening to women, or who knows. But the one thing that really touched me in this story was they're talking to one of the old women in Jerusalem, and they're saying, You know, what should we be doing? And she says something like, well, I think it would be best if it was like bombed. And if it was bombed to be like a radioactive desert, I think that might help. But then again, I think, well, wait a second. There's still a lot of crazy people out there. They'll probably like want to collect the atoms of like what was it, the House of the Rock or the Church of the Rock, and say, oh look, I'm carrying a piece of history. So it's kind of like this. Yeah, well, I wish that we could take away this dangerous war torn place because everyone's fighting over it. Yeah. But at the same time, there's not much you can do. So it's kind of like this story that it's like everyone's just sort of, geez, can you please stop talking about Jerusalem? It's not that big a deal. It's really old. I know it's a big hot spot for religious fanaticism, but please, come on. There's more important things than old rocks and walls. So I'm glad that Gaiman actually told the story, and I'm glad it's not very long because I didn't have to take too long to read it.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, an interesting idea. The next one though, Click Clack the Rattle Bag. It's funny. It's a little horror story, and it's almost like a creepypasta. If you ever sit down and listen to a creepypasta on YouTube, it's like that. And it works that way. Like, it's one of those things that would probably be the most terrifying if it was told to you, by someone else, read to you or spoken to you over a campfire or something, that kind of thing. Just having had some proficiency and some understanding of story structure and plot design, especially as it relates to horror, I certainly saw coming, what was happening.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think Gaiman anticipates that by leaving a certain amount. It's an unresolved ending. He implies everything that's about to happen, that's coming up, and by doing that, I think he retains structurally and stylistically some of the fear that would have been lost if he had just carried this all the way and shown you everything that is coming already.
Right. The pacing, the structure was all fine. I actually felt that the last two paragraphs fell flat because of what you just described. If he left it more mysterious and more unspecified, that would leave the suspense. The suspense would still be there. Yeah. And this one, it's like, oh, that's what happened, and then we don't know exactly what happened afterward, but it's like, oh, as opposed to, is this someone else doing this? Is imagination doing this? No, this is actually what happened. So I wish, that's where I felt it felt flat. Just the last sentence is like, it wasn't as mysterious or as nebulous as it could have been.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a nice little story. I mean, it was enjoyable. Not a ground shaker or anything. The next one's an invocation of incuriosity, and these stories are always kind of fun. This is very much similar to what we saw in the Deathbird when we did Deathbird stories. In that book, there's a couple of stories about the little old man that owns the shop with the magical thing, and it kind of like, if you've seen Gremlins, the little old man that owns the shop with the Mogwai and all that. And that's what this is, and it's his life story, and I thought it was interesting. It's like this kind of weird fantasy hybrid coming-of-age story, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was kind of fascinating.
It was kind of strange because it starts off in this contemporary setting about a guy going to a curio shop, and all of a sudden he gets told another story that you just disregard that original setup, and then all of a sudden it just near the end it's like, oh, then we're back in this other place. And you're like, what? Oh, okay, yeah, right, and then it ends. And you're like, what? And then you realize what happened at the end was the weird fellow gave as a form of payment for the meal a magical item of some sort. And if you're like, wait a second, what does this magical item do? And you flip back and reread it. And you're like, oh. That's what, and then that's the part that really, like, Gaiman was like, "Yep, I'm going to throw this little nugget in there. No one's going to remember it, but it'll make you think about it, and then you have to flip back and read about what happened."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good, and it's good that he trusts the reader that way. It's nice. it's always nice when you don't have to. You can you have something that you can go back and re-examine. And get into it. Yeah, absolutely. So this next story, and Weep Like Alexander. Um, Kind of interesting idea. This is the story of the man whose job it is to uninvent things. Like whenever the human race, whenever their technology is overstepping its bounds, he's the person who comes in and uninvents different technology. It's kind of an interesting idea. I'm kind of I always kind of have a problem with science fiction stories that take this tone, though. The idea of like it's that Icarus effect of like we've gone too far, and we've gone too far. We overstepped our bounds. We need to be reined in. Those who know me know that I like I like the writers like Ayn Rand, whose attitude is the sky's the limit, and
Yeah.
everyone else be damned. We're pushing forward, and all of that. That's more inspiring to me. So I always have kind of a problem, but at the same time, this is kind of an essential element of science fiction. If you think about arguably the original science fiction story was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is about technology overstepping its bounds, its moral bounds. So I'm of two minds on this one. What did you think?
This is a cute little, I would say more of a comedy than, a slap in the face of hard science fiction. It's kind of like, if there was a group of people or people who would prevent technology from going a certain way, or I don't know how they would do it. I mean, it wasn't really described, that they would make sure people are happy, life is okay, we're going in a nice, controlled, slow evolution, so there's less deaths in the world. When obviously you can't say that about world wars and stuff like that and what they did during then. So it's a cute little idea, and I'm not going to take it too seriously because they don't really want to take ideas like flying cars too seriously beyond a certain anecdote. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. The last story we're going to look at today, this one is Nothing O'Clock. Okay, so it's actually a Doctor Who story, and I have seen maybe 2 episodes of Doctor Who in my entire life. I know the premise. When I was in school, we had to study some of the soundtrack design work for film scoring class. So I know the concept and I know the idea, and I like it. It's just one of those things where it's like I'm caught between so many worlds because I want, no pun intended, because I want to I want to watch it and I want to like it and enjoy it, but I feel like I need to, with any series like this, I want to go back to the very start, which goes back to the 1950s with Doctor Who. I want to go all the way back and start from there and work forward, and that would take forever. But also, I maybe it's me being pretentious and emo, I don't know, but I get so put off by when things are just going to be the thing, the in thing. It's very difficult for me to tolerate the when science fiction, fantasy, horror things become an in thing like that. And going to, like, I didn't go to Dragon Con this year. I drove past it, and sure enough, there were a lot of Rick and Mortys.
Yeah.
But it's just like it's gone. That could be a whole separate rant. But like, I can't stand to go to science fiction fantasy conventions anymore because there's no soul in it. It's just people coming to cosplay as their favorite mass market science fiction characters, and yeah, the costumes look great and the women are beautiful and all that, but if you're just going to one of these cons to see sexy women, my God, there are establishments in your local community where women will cavort in the nude in front of you for a nominal fee. So just do that, and don't waste time with the conventions and everything. But there's just no soul to it anymore, and the intellect is gone and all of that, and I just cannot stand when things get like overhyped and overabsorbed. And to me, Doctor Who is one of those franchises where it's like, oh, you've got TARDIS underwear, great. I mean, it's like it's just done.
It
It's just
is,
been done to
yes,
death.
it's the longest running science fiction franchise that we have. Even Ellison praised it for being the best. But yeah, it is
Yeah,
overdone. Gaiman, this is the only story in the book that he had to get a license for, but of course he has written Doctor Who episodes before, so
yeah,
the BBC is like, yeah, sure, write a short story. What do we care?
yeah.
So it's nothing. It's nothing bad. I wouldn't say this is a
No.
bad story, but yeah, it is overdone. It's the same
Yeah.
premise. The Doctor comes in. Only he can solve it. It's going to destroy the entire universe as we know it, and only he can do it. Right? That's
Right.
pretty much how it always goes.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like, it's kind of like I love Star Trek, will always love Star Trek, but there comes a point where you realize that in some of the episodes they've just written themselves into a corner, so they have to get out of it by just making something up. We'll just make something up and go with that. And that's not with Gaiman, but not so much with Gaiman, but with the with the Doctor Who premise in general. That's kind of one of the things is when we'll back ourselves into a corner and just make something up.
Well, yeah, they've
Uh,
they've already passed the limit of the 9 lives of the Doctor. Now he has like
yeah,
12, 13. I don't know. It just never ends, right? So
yeah, yeah. Right, right. And it's just it's kind of like, I mean, again with the Star Trek thing, it's like they get cornered by some trans-dimensional being that's going to kill them, and then they realize that if Vulcans urinate on dilithium crystals, it'll solve everything, and they're done. It's just like some random thing that we come up with, and it's the same thing as like James Bond always having the right gadget for the right situation, and it's like Eddie Izzard said in his comedy routine. Just once, couldn't James Bond have had the wrong gadget for the wrong situation? It's like he gets into the taxi cab and the driver turns around and points a gun at him, and he pushes a little button on his lapel and an oxygen tank comes out. It's like, what are you going to do with that? Nothing, but I have more oxygen than you. And it was like that. I mean, I like the idea of this species that is the whole thing revolves around this species of creature that is just one person, and the way or one entity, and the way it reproduces is by traveling back in time on itself, so that it travels repeatedly to the same point in time. So first there's 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5 of it, and that's how it replicates. And the idea is that they're not allowed to kill it because to kill by the rules of the universe or whatever, that would be genocide. To kill just one of them would be genocide because it would mean killing all of them. So there's this kind of intergalactic red tape that's stopping them. I like that. I like that idea. It's one of those things where it's like, God, couldn't we just take that and do our own thing with it and not make it a Doctor Who episode?
right, yeah.
Yeah. So, not a bad idea. I liked it, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with Doctor Who in general. It's just I just get tired of it's just freaking everywhere, and it's getting so vapid at this point.
Well, with that in mind, there's the latest Star Trek's coming out today, so
Oh, okay.
can't wait to watch that one tonight. Yeah.
Oh, I am much more excited about the Orville. If you've seen the Orville, it is fantastic. It is really the Seth MacFarlane show. People don't understand that the critics aren't getting it because the critics want it to be Family Guy in space, but it actually is a funny Star Trek. Like they're more interested in doing a good Star Trek than they are in doing comedy. And that's what people don't get, or what the critics don't get about it, and that's why the fans love it. So the Orville, I absolutely recommend it wholeheartedly. Oy, well, that brings us to the end of the third installment of Book Talk on Trigger Warning by Neil Gaiman. And so join us next time for the thrilling conclusion, and then also the announcement of our next book, which I think is going to be one that people are really going to be interested in. So, cheers.